The psychology of money is not about numbers first. It is about patterns. Your bank balance is not a financial problem. It is a psychological report. It reflects every belief you hold about money, every emotional decision you made under pressure, every story you inherited and kept obeying, and every habit running beneath your awareness. Let that land. Two people can earn the same income and still arrive at completely different financial futures. One builds quiet strength. The other stays trapped in noise, urgency, and reaction. The difference is almost never the money itself. It is the attention behind the decision, the identity behind the habit, the belief behind the behavior. The quietly wealthy understand something most people never face honestly. Wealth is mental before it is mathematical. The bank account is the result. The mind is the cause. This is not motivational fluff. This is structure. This is where most people stop. They look for tactics before they examine the operating system using those tactics. I learnt this the hard way. I spent years in corporate rooms full of high-income adults, making low-level emotional decisions with polished language and expensive watches. Not theory, lived experience. By the end of this audiobook, 7 psychological secrets will stop feeling like secrets. They will feel like common sense. And that is when your financial life begins to change. Chapter 1. Wealth follows attention. Your financial life begins long before a purchase. It begins a few seconds earlier, in the place almost nobody audits honestly. Attention. The truth is, money does not usually leave your life by force. It leaves by drift. It leaves because your attention was hijacked before your judgment ever arrived. A distracted mind is easy to market to, easy to agitate, easy to sell to, and easy to trap. That is why attention is more valuable than money. Money follows the direction attention takes. Warren Buffett once built his entire advantage around this reality. He did not win because he was the loudest man in the room. He won because he kept directing his mind toward understanding, while other people directed theirs toward noise. He read. He sat with information. He studied businesses, reports, incentives, and human behavior. Billions came later. Attention came first. Most people try to fix finances by attacking spending after the fact. They look at statements, feel guilt, and promise restraint. That is backward. Behavior follows focus. If your attention is reactive, your money will be reactive. If your attention is intentional, your money starts organizing itself around intention. This is why stress is so dangerous. Stress narrows attention. It pulls your mind toward relief instead of strategy. It makes the immediate feel urgent and the important feel distant. In that state, short-term comfort starts looking rational. A purchase feels like relief. A subscription feels small. A weekend indulgence feels earned. The truth is, the decision was already made before the transaction. It was made when your attention lost the ability to hold a long horizon. Behavioral economics has been warning about this for decades. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky showed through prospect theory that human beings do not make decisions in a clean, rational way. People feel losses more intensely than equivalent gains. Under pressure, fear of loss can drive terrible short-term financial choices. You do not need a market crash for this to happen. It happens every Friday night when a stressed person says, "I deserve this," and then wonders why the month keeps ending in panic. The quietly wealthy understand a brutal truth. Entertainment, outrage, comparison, and scattered consumption are not harmless habits. They are attentional theft. And stolen attention produces expensive lives. Look at a normal day. What owns your first hour? What owns the small gaps? What owns the dead time? What owns your evenings? If the answer is scrolling, reacting, gossip, and distraction, then your financial future is already being shaped by things that give you no return. The truth is, Attention is your first investment account. I saw this clearly in my own life after burnout. In corporate leadership, I made strong money and weak use of my mind. I was always busy. Meetings, messages, performance theater, constant reaction. My income looked respectable. My inner architecture was a mess. I was spending mental power on things that produced no long-term strength. When I finally stepped back, I realized the problem was not lack of earning. It was lack of directed attention. I had built a life where my mind belonged to urgency, and urgency is a terrible financial advisor. This is where most people stop. They want a budget. What they need is an attentional audit. Here is a simple framework. Track 1 week of financial attention, not just financial transactions. Morning input, what you consume before work. Midday leakage, what distracts you when pressure rises. Evening relief, what you buy, browse, or justify when tired. Learning ratio, how much time goes to financial understanding versus empty stimulation. Creation ratio, how much attention goes to building value versus consuming content. Do this with honesty and no drama. You will see the truth quickly. Every financial habit sits on top of an attention habit. The quietly wealthy also use attention offensively. They direct it toward information that compounds. They study tax structures, business models, market cycles, skills that increase value. They ask better questions because they have spent time with reality. Most people do the opposite. They spend hours consuming opinions and minutes studying principles. Then they wonder why their decisions stay weak. Read this carefully. You do not rise financially because you suddenly become smarter. You rise because your attention becomes cleaner. Focused attention produces better questions. Better questions produce better decisions. Better decisions produce better outcomes. Repeated outcomes become identity. That is the chain. Stoic philosophy understood this long before modern finance. Marcus Aurelius kept returning to the same discipline. Guard the mind, direct the mind, refuse unnecessary disturbance. He was not writing about stock portfolios. He was writing about command, but the principle is identical. A mind that cannot govern itself cannot govern resources. You do not need more time. You need less fragmentation. You do not need more motivation. You do not need a miracle. You need command over what your mind kneels to each day. This is not glamorous. It is silent work. It is closing the tab, turning off the feed, sitting with a report, reviewing your numbers without flinching, reading when others are numbing themselves, thinking when others are reacting. That is how wealth starts, quietly, internally, long before anyone can see it. The heavy insight is this. Financial progress is often the visible reward for an invisible attentional discipline. The person who learns to direct attention gains an edge before any strategy is applied. And once that edge is established, something deeper has to change, because focused attention still cannot outrun the picture you carry of yourself. Chapter 2. Identity is the real ceiling. Once attention stops leaking, another problem becomes impossible to ignore. You can focus hard and still sabotage the result. You can study money, earn money, even save money for a season, and still find a way to return to the level your identity thinks is normal. That is the ceiling. Self-image. The truth is, most people do not live according to their goals. They live according to their internal thermostat. When life gets too far above the level they secretly think they deserve, they create ways to cool it back down. Not consciously, not theatrically, quietly. A few loose decisions, a few delayed invoices, a few avoidant conversations, a few emotional purchases, enough to restore the familiar. This is why sudden money so often disappears. Lottery winners, athletes, entertainers, and instant business owners can receive an enormous financial spike and still collapse back toward their baseline. The strategy was never enough, because the identity was never prepared to hold the result. Oprah Winfrey is one of the clearest counterexamples. She did not come from financial comfort. She came from chaos, poverty, humiliation, and conditions that could have taught her permanent limitation. But at some point her internal picture changed. She stopped relating to herself as someone trapped by origin and started operating as someone who could build influence, value, and power. The empire came later. The identity came first. This is where most people stop. They work on income without working on worthiness. You may not like that word. Fine. Use capacity if you prefer, but the principle stays the same. If your nervous system reads wealth as danger, corruption, isolation, or something not for people like you, then every tactical improvement will be met by invisible resistance. Childhood matters here more than most adults want to admit. If money was always spoken about with fear, resentment, secrecy, or conflict, your mind built a map. That map still guides adult behavior. If success made other people jealous in your family, you may unconsciously shrink to stay safe. If earning well was associated with greed or moral compromise, you may keep stalling right before meaningful progress. The truth is, many adults do not have a money strategy problem. They have an identity loyalty problem. I have seen this destroy people. A senior executive can negotiate million-dollar contracts for a company and still feel guilty charging appropriately for personal consulting. A business owner can grow revenue and then immediately inflate lifestyle to avoid feeling the discomfort of surplus. A professional can say they want wealth while continuing to dress psychologically like a person who expects collapse. Not theory, lived experience. In my corporate years, I watched people receive promotions they had chased for years and then begin self-sabotage within months. Not because they lacked talent, because the new level exposed a deeper contradiction. Their role changed faster than their self-image. They started over-explaining, overspending, hiding, pleasing, delaying, or creating drama. The truth is, success does not only reveal strength, it reveals identity gaps. This also explains why positive thinking is useless on its own. Repeating, "I am wealthy," to a mind loaded with evidence of fear, shame, and avoidance changes nothing. Identity shifts through repeated behavioral evidence. Your brain trusts what you repeatedly do, not what you occasionally say. Here is the framework. First, identify your current money identity in one sentence. I am the kind of person who always struggles. I am the kind of person who never keeps money. I am the kind of person who can earn but not grow. I am the kind of person who must work hard for every dollar. Second, examine where that sentence came from. Family language, early humiliations, social class conditioning, past failures that became identity instead of events. Third, create a new identity sentence based on conduct, not fantasy. I am the kind of person who manages money calmly. I am the kind of person who keeps a percentage of everything earned. I am the kind of person who makes decisions from numbers, not mood. I am the kind of person who belongs in financially strong rooms. Fourth, cast daily votes. Review accounts without avoidance. Transfer money automatically. Say no to status spending. Study for 30 minutes instead of escaping to scrolling. Invoice clearly. Negotiate once instead of apologizing twice. These are identity votes. James Clear made the phrase popular in habit writing, but the deeper principle is older than modern self-improvement. Repeated action writes self-image. Each behavior tells the brain, this is who you are now. Wealth is held by identity long before it is held by accounts. Counterintuitive truth. Trying to act humble with money often keeps people poor. I am not talking about arrogance. I am talking about psychological shrinking. Many people think downplaying ambition makes them virtuous. It usually makes them timid. Quiet wealth does not require loud ego, but it does require full permission to occupy a larger financial life without apology. The wealthy behave like people who belong where they are going, even before evidence arrives. That is not delusion. It is disciplined congruence. You do not wait to feel worthy before acting with order. You act with order until worthiness stops feeling foreign. You do not wait to feel like an investor before investing. You invest until your identity updates. You do not wait to feel like a builder before building. You build until your self-image can no longer deny what you are. The heavy insight is this: sustainable wealth cannot outperform the internal picture you carry of yourself for long. Raise the picture, or the old ceiling will keep lowering the result. And once identity starts shifting, the next threat becomes clearer than ever, because even a stronger self-image can still be punctured by emotional behavior. Chapter 3. Why systems beat emotional spending every time. When identity begins to expand, another leak shows itself: emotion. Not just big dramatic emotion, quiet daily emotion, stress, boredom, comparison, insecurity, loneliness, fatigue. These are not side issues in money. They are often the hand on the wallet. The truth is, most spending problems are not financial in origin. They are emotional in origin and financial in expression. The person rarely says, "I am buying this because I feel inadequate." They say, "It is not that expensive. I work hard. I need something nice. I deserve this." That language is not analysis. It is sedation. This is why willpower fails. Under emotional pressure, rational thought weakens. Kahneman described fast thinking and slow thinking for a reason. Under stress, the mind wants immediate closure. It wants relief, not reflection. The wealthy do not win by having saint-level self-control. They win by building systems that protect them from themselves on bad days. Ray Dalio learnt this through pain. In 1982, he made a highly confident macroeconomic prediction, got it badly wrong, and nearly lost everything. That failure pushed him towards stronger systems, written principles, and decision frameworks designed to reduce emotional distortion. The insight was simple and brutal. Confidence is not protection. Structure is. This is where most people stop. They keep trying to become a stronger version of the same unstable decision maker. That is not discipline. That is repetition. Emotional spending usually follows predictable triggers: stress spending, buying relief; boredom spending, buying stimulation; comparison spending, buying status; insecurity spending, buying identity; loneliness spending, buying comfort; celebration spending, buying permission to regress. If you know your trigger, you can build a system around it. If you do not, you keep calling it bad luck. Richard Thaler's work on mental accounting helps explain part of this. People do not treat all money equally. A tax refund feels different from salary. A bonus feels different from steady income. Found money gets spent with less friction. That is not mathematics. That is psychology, assigning different emotional meaning to the same unit of currency. The quietly wealthy remove some of this distortion through predetermined rules. Here is the practical framework. Build a 48-hour wall around non-essential purchases above a number you choose. Create separate automatic flows on payday: bills, long-term investing, cash reserve, joy spending with a hard limit. Reduce friction for the right decision: automatic transfers, investment contributions, scheduled bill payment, simple visual tracking. Increase friction for the wrong decision: delete saved cards. Use a different account for discretionary spending. Require written justification for purchases above your threshold. Leave luxury items in a cart for 2 days. You are not trying to become emotionless. You are building a gap wide enough for emotion to cool before money moves. I learnt this the hard way. During burnout, I was not reckless in public. I was respectable. That is more dangerous. Respectable people hide emotional spending inside language that sounds mature: better meals, better escapes, better justifications. The expenses were not destroying me individually. The pattern was, I was using money to regulate pressure I did not know how to process. Once I admitted that, the solution stopped being moral and became structural. Emotional architecture matters more than moral shame. The truth is, shame keeps people reactive. Systems make them free. If every month depends on your mood, you do not have a financial plan, you have a financial hope. Hope is fragile. Systems survive bad weather. This also applies to investing. Many people say they want long-term growth, then panic during volatility and sell near the bottom. That is prospect theory again. Loss feels sharper than gain, so the pain of temporary decline overwhelms the logic of long-term compounding. The quietly wealthy expect emotion. They do not worship it. They automate contributions. They allocate based on principles. They stop asking fear for permission every time the market moves. Counterintuitive truth. More budgeting detail can sometimes make emotional spending worse. Why? Because obsessive tracking without structural calm increases guilt, and guilt often seeks relief through the very behavior it hates. A clean system beats an intense spreadsheet that collapses under pressure. You need fewer heroic moments and more boring protections. Rules save energy. Automation saves character. Friction saves judgment. Distance saves money. That is how adults build financial integrity. And there is something deeper here. Once money stops being used to manage emotion, attention returns, identity stabilizes, space opens. Then a harder question arrives. If your spending is no longer bleeding you, how exactly are you thinking about earning in the first place? Because many people never break the ceiling, not because they lack effort, but because they still sell life by the hour. Chapter 4. Stop selling time. Start building value. There comes a point where discipline alone is no longer enough. You can budget well, save consistently, control impulse, and still stay financially compressed if your entire earning model is built on one tired assumption: time in, money out. The truth is, trading time for money is not just an economic arrangement, it is a psychological prison if it remains your only model. As long as you think of earning as compensation for hours, your mind will keep measuring life in units too small to build freedom. You will ask, what is my rate? The quietly wealthy ask, what is the value of the problem I can solve at scale? That is a different operating system. Andrew Carnegie understood this early. He saw that personal effort alone had a ceiling. His deeper advantage was not that he worked harder than everyone else. It was that he grasped leverage. He understood that systems, capital, people, and infrastructure could multiply output beyond the limit of one man's labor. That is a psychological shift before it is a business strategy. This is where most people stop. They want a raise when they need a new model. I am not telling you to quit your job tomorrow. That is adolescent advice. I am telling you to examine the architecture beneath your income. If every dollar still requires a fresh slice of your personal time, then freedom remains mathematically difficult. The goal is not to despise work. The goal is to stop thinking effort and earnings must always move in a straight line together. Quietly wealthy people build value in forms that travel without them every minute. Equity, content, products, licensing, systems, teams, processes, ownership. Even when they still have jobs, they start thinking like builders. I watched this split happen in corporate life. Two people with similar intelligence and similar salaries would diverge dramatically over 10 years. One optimized comfort, better title, better benefits, slightly better compensation. The other quietly built assets, advisory relationships, skills with market value beyond the employer. A small business, a niche expertise that could scale. One stayed dependent on payroll. One started making payroll optional. The difference was not hustle culture. It was psychological leverage. Economics gives you the language. opportunity cost, marginal utility, scale. But the truth is simpler. If your mind only sees earning through labor, it cannot easily recognize higher-order opportunity. That is why some people stay trapped in high-functioning exhaustion. They are not lazy. They are operating from the wrong question. They keep asking, how can I work harder? The better question is, how can I solve a problem for more people than I can personally serve in 1 hour? That question changes everything. A teacher can build a curriculum once and license it many times. A consultant can turn repeated advice into a framework and then a program. A designer can create templates. A tradesman can train others and build capacity. A professional can acquire equity or performance upside instead of only salary. Value expands when contribution becomes transferable. Counterintuitive truth. Job security often creates financial fragility. Most people think the safe move is to cling harder to predictable income, but dependence on one institution is its own risk. Quiet wealth is usually built by reducing single-point failure, more skill, more optionality, more forms of value, more ownership. The Stoics would recognize this immediately. External structures are unstable, titles shift, markets change, employers cut, prestige disappears. If your earning power depends only on one arrangement outside your control, your internal stability is weaker than it looks. Strength comes from cultivating capacities that survive circumstance. Here is the practical framework. List the skills people already trust you for. List the problems those skills solve. List how those solutions could reach more people without more direct hours. Turn one repeated solution into a repeatable asset. Dedicate weekly time to building value that is not consumed the moment you deliver it. That can begin embarrassingly small. One written guide, one process, one offer, one system, one asset. The point is not scale on day one. The point is changing the model in your head. You are not only a worker, you are a potential builder. You are not only paid for effort, you can be paid for usefulness. You are not only exchanging hours, you can create structures that keep working when you stop. This does not make labor dishonorable, it makes leverage necessary. I learnt this the hard way. Burnout taught me that a high income built on total personal depletion is not wealth. It is dependency wearing a suit. The day I understood that, I stopped admiring earnings without structure. A person can look successful and still be one disrupted quarter away from fear. The quietly wealthy think beyond the next paycheck because they have trained themselves to respect value over activity. That is why their lives often look boring from the outside. Repetition, refinement, patient building, no constant reinvention, no desperate motion. And that leads directly into a principle almost nobody romanticizes correctly. The boredom that most people avoid is often the exact place wealth begins to compound. Chapter 5. Boredom is the address of lasting wealth. Most financial plans do not die in crisis. They die in boredom. That is the truth. People imagine failure arrives through catastrophe. Sometimes it does, but far more often it arrives through restlessness. The strategy was sound. The savings plan worked. The investments were fine. The business had momentum. Then the mind got hungry for excitement. It wanted novelty. It wanted proof. It wanted movement it could feel. So it interfered. This is where most people stop. Not when the plan is wrong, when the plan becomes quiet. Charlie Munger said the big money is not in the buying or the selling, but in the waiting. That sentence sounds simple until you try to live it. Waiting is hard because the brain confuses inactivity with weakness. It wants stimulation. It wants the chemical reward of action. And wealth, in many of its strongest forms, grows in silence. Ronald Reid proved this without prestige. He worked as a gas station attendant and janitor. Nothing glamorous, no elite access, no flashy innovation. He bought quality dividend-paying companies, lived below his means, and held for decades. After his death, the world learned he had built a fortune of roughly $8 million. The strategy was boring. The patience was extraordinary. Behavioral finance has a name for part of this problem. Present bias. Human beings overweight immediate reward and undervalue distant benefit. That is why a small pleasure today can beat a much larger advantage later, even when the math is obvious. Walter Mischel's delay of gratification research became famous because it revealed something deeper than child behavior. The ability to tolerate deferred reward shapes adult outcomes across domains. Money is one of them. The quietly wealthy train their emotional system to stop demanding constant visible progress. They understand compounding feels unimpressive for a long time. Then it stops being unimpressive all at once. This applies to investing, skill building, business creation, debt reduction, reputation. Every durable gain looks modest in the middle. That middle is where most people panic and switch strategies. They call it adaptation. Often it is impatience dressed as sophistication. I have seen this destroy people. A person makes 6 months of disciplined progress, sees no dramatic external change, and decides the process is not working. So they pivot. New strategy, new platform, new investment idea, new side business, new spending plan. The issue was never lack of intelligence. It was inability to tolerate the emotional flatness of correct repetition. Here is the counterintuitive insight. Boredom is often evidence that the system is finally stable. If your budget feels boring, good. If your automatic investments feel boring, good. If your debt reduction feels repetitive, good. If your business offer feels simple and proven, good. Excitement is overrated in finance. Excitement often signals risk, ego, or instability. The truth is, wealthy people are not always more visionary. Often they are just less addicted to stimulation. Stoicism helps here. Seneca wrote about the instability of chasing luxury and sensation. He understood that craving constant change weakens the mind. Financially, that weakness becomes expensive. A person who cannot sit still will pay for novelty with lost compounding. Here is the practical framework. Choose one wealth-building process in each major category. One saving rule, one investing schedule, one debt rule, one value-building project. Set the review period in advance. Monthly for spending, quarterly for investing, biannually for major strategic shifts. Outside those windows, do not tinker unless reality truly changes. Then build a boredom ritual. When the urge to interfere appears, do something that reinforces patience. Read your original plan. Review long-term projections. Study historical charts. Take a walk before making any financial move. This is not passivity. It is disciplined non-interference. People admire compounding as a concept. Few respect the psychology it demands. To let something grow, you must resist the ego's desire to keep touching it. Every time you interrupt a good process to feel active, you tax the future. Every time you stay steady through dullness, you feed the future. Every time you choose consistency over stimulation, you train the mind to serve wealth instead of sabotage it. I learnt this the hard way in recovery from burnout. Once the adrenaline of crisis was gone, rebuilding felt strangely empty. No dramatic enemy, no visible applause. Just repeated choices. Sleep on time, spend less, read more, build slowly. That phase felt unimpressive. It was also the phase that changed everything. The nervous system that can tolerate calm becomes dangerous in the best possible way. The heavy insight is this: if you cannot handle the quiet stage, you will never reach the powerful stage. Wealth usually matures in the absence of excitement, and to stay steady long enough for that to happen, you must confront an even deeper force than impatience. The inherited beliefs that keep making your behavior feel normal, even when normal is hurting you. Chapter 6. Your inherited beliefs are your real financial ceiling. A person can have a good plan, a strong identity shift, and a cleaner emotional system, and still keep hitting the same invisible wall. That wall is often not personal failure, it is inherited belief. The truth is, many of your financial thoughts did not begin as your thoughts. They were installed. Family language installs beliefs. Cultural shame installs beliefs. Class conditioning installs beliefs. Early humiliation installs beliefs. Repeated scarcity installs beliefs. And once installed, beliefs stop feeling like opinions. They start feeling like truth. This is where most people stop. They critique their behavior without questioning the script producing it. If you grew up hearing that rich people are corrupt, money causes conflict, security is always temporary, or people like us never get ahead, your adult financial behavior will often obey those assumptions automatically. You may want wealth consciously and reject it unconsciously at the same time. Oprah Winfrey has spoken openly about doing deeper inner work around the beliefs she absorbed from poverty and pain. That matters. Her rise was not just talent meeting opportunity, it was a psychological revision of what was permitted in her own self-concept. She did not merely earn more. She examined what money meant in the chamber where meaning gets formed. Modern psychology would call some of this schema. Stoicism would call it mistaken judgment. Either way, the result is the same. Unexamined belief becomes repeated behavior. There are 4 common money beliefs that quietly damage adults. Money is hard to keep. This produces anxiety, underinvestment, and constant anticipation of loss. Wanting money is selfish. This produces guilt, undercharging, and fear of ambition. I will never be safe. This produces hoarding in some people and reckless spending in others, because both are attempts to escape fear. People like me do not build real wealth. This produces ceiling behavior, resignation, and small thinking disguised as realism. The truth is, your behavior makes sense once the hidden belief is named. I learnt this the hard way. After my career collapse, I found a belief I had been living from for years. Achievement keeps you safe. That belief made me overwork, ignore physical warning signs, and treat rest like weakness. It also shaped money. I kept tying financial worth to constant proving. When I finally saw that belief clearly, I could stop worshipping it. That changed both my schedule and my spending. Beliefs do not fall because you argue with them once. They fall because evidence keeps arriving against them. This is why affirmations are usually too weak. The mind does not update through slogans. It updates through repeated contradiction. If you believe money always disappears, save automatically for 6 months and do not touch it. If you believe charging well is wrong, set one clear rate and hold the line. If you believe you are bad with money, track spending calmly for 90 days and prove capability through conduct. If you believe wealth makes people cold, study examples of disciplined generosity. Behavior revises belief. History offers strong examples. John the 500th. Rockefeller began recording and allocating money while still young and largely unproven. He kept careful ledgers, practiced intentional giving, and treated financial order like character training long before he had scale. The belief underneath that behavior was clear. Money should be managed, not feared, stewarded, not dramatized. Those early acts were not about amount, they were about identity and belief in action. Here is the belief audit framework. Write your first memory of money. Write the repeated phrases you heard about money growing up. Write the emotion you still feel when checking accounts, discussing price, asking for more, or investing. Connect each emotion to a sentence. Then ask one question: is this belief chosen or inherited? That question alone can break something open. Most adults never chose their money worldview consciously. They inherited it in fragments and lived it as fate. Counterintuitive truth. Technical financial education often fails because it argues with behavior while leaving belief untouched. A person can learn compound interest and still sabotage savings if the old internal script says stability never lasts. Information matters, but unchallenged belief often beats information. You must become a witness to your own scripts. When you hear yourself say, "I am just not good with money," stop. When you hear, "People like me never get ahead," stop. When you hear, "I need to enjoy it now because it never lasts," stop. That is not reality speaking. That is programming speaking. The quietly wealthy are not free from inherited beliefs because they were born special. They are freer because they learned to interrogate them. They stopped confusing familiarity with truth. The heavy insight is this: many financial ceilings are not built from markets, wages, or timing. They are built from old sentences repeated inside the mind until they became architecture. Change the sentence through disciplined evidence, and the whole room begins to change. And when that room changes, one final strategic question emerges. Are you organizing your financial life around protection from pain or construction of power? Chapter 7. Play offense, not defense. Fear looks responsible in adult clothing. That is why so many people never challenge it. The truth is, a defensive financial life can feel prudent while quietly keeping you weak. Defense says, "Do not lose." Offense says, "Build." Defense says, "Protect what little you have." Offense says, "Create more than fear can threaten." Most people live almost entirely in defense. They avoid learning because they do not want to feel behind. They avoid investing because they do not want temporary loss. They avoid risk because uncertainty feels immoral. They avoid expanding skill because comfort is easier to defend than potential is to pursue. This is where most people stop. They confuse caution with strategy. Jeff Bezos used what he called a regret minimization framework when deciding whether to leave a strong job and start Amazon. He projected himself forward and asked which choice he would regret more. That question shifted his mind from defense to offense. He stopped asking, "How do I avoid looking foolish now?" and started asking, "What direction matters when seen from a lifetime?" Quiet wealth is built by people who learn to move toward opportunity with structure, not recklessly, not blindly, but decisively. The wealthy are not fearless. That fantasy needs to die. They feel the same uncertainty everyone feels. The difference is that they do not require emotional comfort before action. They build enough research, margin, and resilience to move anyway. This applies far beyond entrepreneurship. An offensive saver increases earning power while reducing waste. An offensive investor studies before the perfect feeling arrives. An offensive employee builds portable skill before the job becomes unstable. An offensive business owner reinvests in systems before competition becomes a crisis. An offensive thinker learns taxes, incentives, and ownership instead of hiding from complexity. Defense alone becomes expensive over time. Inflation punishes stagnant cash. Undeveloped skills lose market value. Untaken opportunities accumulate as invisible regret. Fear tells you avoiding loss keeps you safe. The truth is, excessive defense often creates the exact vulnerability it is trying to avoid. I saw this constantly after the financial crisis years. Professionals who had watched companies fail became psychologically frozen. Some learned caution, others learned paralysis. They kept cash idle for too long, refused strategic skill investment, stayed in dead roles for false security. Then years passed. They were not safer. They were simply older, with fewer options. Behavioral science explains some of this through loss aversion. Loss hurts more than gain pleases, so the mind overprotects, but life punishes overprotection when it blocks growth. This is the paradox. Avoiding all risk is itself a profound risk. Counterintuitive truth. Conservative behavior and defensive behavior are not the same thing. Conservative behavior is structured. Defensive behavior is fear-led. One is calm, the other is cramped. Here is the framework for financial offense without recklessness. Build a downside floor, emergency reserve, controlled expenses, manageable debt, insurance where appropriate. Then build an upside engine, continuous learning, skill expansion, asset ownership, calculated investing, value creation outside one income source. Then establish decision rules. What percentage goes to growth? What risks are acceptable? What research is required before action? What timeline defines success? This lets you act from direction instead of impulse. The truth is, offense needs preparation. You do not jump into chaos and call it courage. You build strength, then move. But once strength exists, endless hesitation becomes cowardice, disguised as wisdom. The Stoics did not preach passivity. They preached clear action within what can be governed. Money belongs in that conversation. You cannot control markets fully. You can control your study, allocation, savings rate, resilience, and courage. That is enough to build from. I learnt this the hard way. After rebuilding, my first instinct was to overprotect everything. No mistakes, no risk, no stretch. That felt mature. It was actually fear speaking through polished language. The turning point came when I saw that defense could preserve survival, but not create freedom. Freedom required a return to direction. You need a financial life that is not only hard to destroy, you need one that is built to grow. That is offense. The heavy insight is this: money organized around fear remains small even when the numbers improve. Money organized around deliberate expansion becomes a tool of power. And once these 7 principles start coming into view together, you stop seeing them as isolated ideas. You start seeing the architecture beneath them all. Chapter 8. Why wealth is mental before it is mathematical. At this point, the pattern should be impossible to miss. Attention, identity, emotion, value, patience, belief, offense. These are not 7 random tips. They are 7 expressions of one deeper truth. The mind is the primary financial instrument. The truth is, every visible money outcome has an invisible psychological history behind it. Before the debt, before the savings, before the investment, before the business. There was a pattern of thought, attention, emotion, interpretation, and behavior running long enough to make that result predictable. This is where most people stop. They treat wealth as a spreadsheet event, when it is actually an operating system event. Behavioral economics has repeatedly shown that human beings do not behave like clean, rational calculators. Kahneman and Tversky showed loss aversion and distorted risk perception. Thaler showed mental accounting and status quo bias. People do not just respond to numbers. They respond to stories, frames, moods, defaults, and fear. That means your financial future is shaped less by what is objectively available than by how your mind processes what is available. Stoic philosophy saw this in a different language. Marcus Aurelius kept returning to the discipline of governing perception. Epictetus kept drawing the line between what is within your command and what is not. Seneca warned against enslavement to luxury, praise, and emotional excess. None of them were writing retirement plans. They were writing psychological laws. Those laws apply to wealth more directly than many modern people realize. If you do not command attention, markets and media will borrow your mind. If you do not command identity, old ceilings will keep lowering your result. If you do not command emotion, money becomes medication. If you do not command patience, compounding dies in your hands. If you do not command belief, inherited scripts keep writing adult outcomes. If you do not command direction, fear keeps organizing your future. That is the integrated psychology of wealth. Real wealth builders often cannot fully explain this because it has become natural for them. It feels like common sense. They review numbers calmly. They delay gratification. They study before acting. They build value. They take measured risk. They think in decades. Their behavior looks simple because the operating system underneath it is stable. Counterintuitive truth. More income without psychological upgrade often makes the problem worse. It gives your patterns more fuel. A scattered mind with more money becomes more scattered at a higher price point. An insecure identity with more money becomes more performative. An emotional spender with more money becomes an elegant self-saboteur. This is why income leaps often fail to create lasting peace. The nervous system remains unchanged, so the old output returns in a more expensive form. I have seen this destroy people. A person earns double and still lives in private panic. Another earns less and keeps getting stronger because the architecture is disciplined. The difference is internal order, not luck, not image, order. Here is the immediate application. Take the 7 principles and score yourself from 1 to 10 on each. Attention, identity, emotional control, value creation, patience, belief awareness, offensive action. Do not score based on intention. Score based on observable conduct in the last 90 days. Then pick the lowest 2 scores. Those are not weaknesses to hide. They are leverage points. Improve the lowest 2, and the rest often begin to strengthen because these dimensions reinforce each other. Cleaner attention helps emotional control. Stronger identity improves pricing and negotiation. Better emotional systems protect patience. Updated beliefs make offensive action less threatening. More offensive action creates evidence that reshapes identity. That is why wealth can compound non-linearly once psychology starts stabilizing. The truth is, the numbers matter. Budgeting matters. Taxes matter. Investing matters. But mathematics expresses what psychology permits. Until that order is understood, people keep trying to solve internal disorder with external tactics alone. The heavy insight is this: your mind is not a side character in your financial life. It is the engine room. And once the engine room becomes disciplined, the practical effects begin to spread far beyond money itself. Because an integrated psychological system does not only change a bank balance, it changes a life. Chapter 9. The compound effect of psychological wealth. When these principles begin to work together, something important happens. Progress stops feeling like isolated wins and starts feeling like a different life structure. The truth is, the quietly wealthy are not simply people who know more about money. They are people whose psychology makes correct behavior easier to repeat. That is why their gains compound in ways that seem mysterious from the outside. Improve one lever, and you get improvement. Improve several together, and you get multiplication. This is where most people stop. They collect insights without integrating them. A person may learn attention control, but still have weak identity. They may update beliefs, but still spend emotionally. They may build value, but sabotage it through impatience. They may invest steadily, but stay defensive in career and opportunity. The gap between knowing and becoming lives in integration. Benjamin Franklin gives a powerful historical example. He did not rely on raw ambition alone. He deliberately cultivated multiple disciplines at once, through tracked virtues, structured reflection, and repeated correction. That is what made him so unusually effective across business, writing, diplomacy, and public life. He built a psychological system. The external success was the visible trail left behind by internal order. Now imagine the compound effect in your own financial life over time. In 1 year, directed attention reduces leakage. A stronger self-image improves negotiation and boundaries. Emotional systems lower impulsive loss. Patience preserves consistency. Belief work removes hidden breaks. Offensive thinking opens new value channels. That alone can change cash flow, stress, and confidence. In 3 years, the effects become more structural. Savings stop being effortful. Investing becomes routine. Your skill base rises. Your earning architecture diversifies. You recover faster from setbacks because fear no longer governs every move. In 10 years, your life may become unrecognizable, not because of one dramatic breakthrough, because thousands of aligned decisions stopped fighting each other. That is compound psychological wealth. Research on habit formation is often oversimplified, but one principle remains useful. Repetition in a stable context reduces friction over time. Whether the exact timeline is 60 days or longer is less important than the mechanism. Consistent behavior eventually stops feeling like performance and starts feeling like self. That is the threshold you are after. Counterintuitive truth. Most people do not fail from lack of information. They fail from lack of sustained identity and consistent repetition. They want outcomes that only belong to people who have become different internally. So they keep resetting the process instead of stabilizing it. I learned this the hard way. Rebuilding my life did not happen the moment I understood what was wrong. It happened when repeated conduct became too consistent to argue with. I was no longer trying to live differently. I was living differently. That shift is quieter than people expect. There is no trumpet, no cinematic revelation, just a day when the old pattern no longer feels like home. Use this framework. Define the financial self you are building in practical terms. Then define the weekly behaviors that prove it. Then define the monthly review that keeps it honest. Then protect the system from mood. That is all. Not easy, but clear. Attention without review drifts. Identity without behavior stays fantasy. Systems without patience collapse. Belief work without action stays intellectual. Offense without discipline becomes recklessness. Integration is the answer. The quietly wealthy do not appear magical because they found a secret stock, a clever app, or a perfect side hustle. They appear calm because their inner mechanisms support their outer aims. Their actions stop contradicting each other. Their mind, money, and direction begin pulling in the same direction. The heavy insight is this: real wealth often looks slow until the architecture underneath it becomes coherent. Then progress stops leaking, and when that happens long enough, a final shift emerges. Money starts responding not just to what you do, but to who you have become. Chapter 10. The Wealth Identity. In the end, all 7 secrets point toward one final reality. Wealth is not only something you acquire, it is something your identity becomes able to hold, direct, and reproduce. The truth is, there are different psychological relationships with money. The avoider feels stress and turns away. The chaser pursues money from scarcity and never feels settled. The attractor creates conditions that money can trust. That last phrase matters. Money can trust. Not in a mystical sense, in a structural sense. Money flows toward order, clarity, patience, and value. It flees chaos, vanity, confusion, and reaction. This is where most people stop. They ask, what should I do differently? The deeper question is, who are you becoming through what you repeatedly do? John the 500th. Rockefeller showed this early in life. Before massive wealth arrived, he was already practicing careful allocation, record-keeping, and intentional giving. Those actions were identity rehearsal. He was casting votes for the kind of person he intended to be, long before the world saw evidence. That is the wealth identity: directed attention, expanded self-image, emotion under system, value over mere labor, patience in repetition, beliefs examined and revised, offense guided by discipline. When these become ordinary for you, money starts experiencing you differently. Opportunities are handled better. Earnings are kept more calmly. Risk is evaluated more intelligently. Resources are stewarded rather than dramatized. Wealth no longer has to force its way through internal resistance. Counterintuitive truth. Chasing money too hard often repels the very stability you want. Scarcity intensity creates poor decisions. Overeagerness creates weak negotiation. Desperation creates bad risk. The quietly wealthy are often less obsessed with money than the struggling are. Not because they do not care, but because they understand money responds best to a strong operator, not an anxious pursuer. You become that operator through conduct. Every time you review numbers, instead of avoiding them, you cast a vote. Every time you save before spending, you cast a vote. Every time you invest before you feel fully ready, with research and calm, you cast a vote. Every time you build value, instead of only consuming, you cast a vote. Every time you refuse emotional spending, you cast a vote. Every time you challenge an inherited belief with better evidence, you cast a vote. Every time you choose direction over fear, you cast a vote. That is how identity is built, quietly, repeatedly, without performance. I learnt this the hard way. After burnout, I wanted quick reassurance that rebuilding was working. What I got instead was something stronger, a long season of small disciplined choices that slowly made me unrecognizable to my former self. Financial independence did not arrive as a feeling. It arrived as evidence that the architecture had changed, not theory, lived experience. The truth is, money does not simply reward effort. It often rewards coherence. A coherent person is easier to trust, easier to invest in, easier to promote, easier to partner with, easier to follow, easier to pay. That coherence is psychological before it is commercial. This is why the 7 secrets matter together. They are not hacks, they are descriptions of the attractor identity, the person who can direct attention, the person who can tolerate boredom, the person who can hold a larger self-image without apology, the person who can feel emotion without obeying it, the person who can build value beyond time, the person who can replace inherited fear with chosen structure, the person who can play offense with calm discipline. That is the person money flows toward, not because the universe is sentimental, because reality rewards order. The heavy insight is this: permanent financial change begins the moment you stop asking how to get more money and start asking what kind of mind can be trusted with more of it. Answer that through your conduct, and the result will eventually become visible enough that even you can no longer deny it. Your financial life reveals your private discipline. Money does not expose your intelligence first. It exposes your patterns. A rising income cannot save a collapsing inner structure. The account is only the echo. The mind spoke first. The truth is, every purchase carries a belief inside it. Every delay carries a fear inside it. Every excuse carries an identity inside it. Every repeated habit is casting a vote. This is where most people stop. They touch the number and ignore the cause. They blame the market and ignore the pattern. They blame timing and ignore attention. They blame income and ignore identity. You do not become wealthy by wanting wealth harder. You become wealth capable by becoming harder to deceive, harder to distract, harder to provoke, harder to seduce with short-term relief. The quietly wealthy are often not louder. They are cleaner. Cleaner in thought, cleaner in motive, cleaner in routine, cleaner in decision. A scattered mind creates an expensive life. An undirected life creates an expensive decade. A fearful life creates an expensive future. You do not need to impress money. You need to stop repelling it with chaos. Every time you open your accounts calmly, you reclaim power. Every time you tell the truth about your patterns, you reclaim power. Every time you choose structure over mood, you reclaim power. Every time you build value instead of performing value, you reclaim power. Silence is part of wealth. Not empty silence, disciplined silence. The silence that lets you think before you react. The silence that lets you wait while others keep touching the plan. The silence that lets compounding work without your interference. The silence that keeps your ego from spending what your future needs. I have seen this destroy people. Not poverty alone. Noise, comparison, emotional leakage, unexamined beliefs, high income with low control, low patience with high ambition. That combination ruins adults quietly. The world teaches you to chase the visible. The quietly wealthy train themselves to master the invisible. Attention is invisible. Self-image is invisible. Fear is invisible. Belief is invisible. Patience is invisible. But the bill always arrives in visible form. The truth is, money is rarely ruined in one decision. It is weakened in 1,000 moments of unconsciousness, a purchase made for relief, a risk avoided from fear, a skill neglected from comfort, a belief obeyed without examination, a strategy abandoned because it became boring. That is how a life leaks away, not dramatically, habitually. The correction begins the same way: a calmer glance at the numbers, a cleaner morning, a smaller impulse resisted, a better question asked, a stricter rule obeyed, a more offensive move prepared, a belief challenged, a vote cast for a different self. You do not need to become someone fake. You need to become someone ordered, someone steady enough to hold what they build, someone quiet enough to hear their own excuses, someone disciplined enough to stop negotiating with weakness, someone patient enough to let the seed stay underground without digging it up, someone clear enough to know that peace and power are not enemies. Money does not ask whether you are sincere. Money asks whether you are structured. Opportunity does not ask whether you are inspired. Opportunity asks whether you are prepared. Compounding does not ask whether you are excited. Compounding asks whether you can remain. This is why the work is psychological first. A new account balance without a new internal architecture is a temporary event. A new architecture eventually creates a new balance. That is the order. Cause first, result second, mind first, money second. If your attention sharpens, your decisions sharpen. If your decisions sharpen, your habits stabilize. If your habits stabilize, your identity strengthens. If your identity strengthens, your financial life stops collapsing under old pressure. If your pressure stops ruling you, direction becomes possible. And when direction becomes consistent, quiet wealth begins to gather. Not all at once, not for applause, not for status, but because your life stopped fighting itself. The truth is, you are always becoming someone in relation to money. Avoider, chaser, attractor. Your daily conduct chooses, not your fantasies, not your intentions, not your speeches, your conduct. That is the final mirror, not what you want from money. What kind of person are you training money to find? Because money can survive in many hands, but it only grows quietly in disciplined ones. And that discipline begins the moment you stop asking for rescue and start building architecture.